easiest way to get into the
Wholeness and welcome. This is Josh Dippold from Integrating Presence. And today's topic, what are thoughts? Are dreams like thoughts? So the description I have here, let's powwow for 30 minutes or so on these two questions that came from a Distortions and Dream event that I recently led, and address any parallels between thoughts and dreams. We may even do some mindfulness of thinking meditation. So this will be in two main parts. I'll allow you all to draw most of the parallels on your own, dreams and thought. I'll kind of address each one. We'll start with thoughts. What are thoughts? And of course, standard disclaimer that this is just pretty much my own experience and research. This information is. It's not to be taken as truth. It's just a starting point for your own investigation and research. Yes, I'm not responsible for you do or don't do with this information. And of course, this is only going to scratch the surface because, thinking, it's just a huge, vast topic. And that's only one small part of mine, too. So the standard, or a definition here, we thought we'd define as a group here what we mean by thought before we get going. It's an idea or an opinion produced by thinking or occurring subtly in the mind. It's a dictionary definition. It's also the act or process of thinking. Of course, we all know what this means. It's just kind of putting words to this, right? Are conscious cognitive processes that can happen independently of sensory stimulation. And then thinking, of course, is the process of using one's mind to consider or reason about something. So when you look into this more simply in your own experience, there seems to be kind of two camps of people usually that think in either images or words. So the images is pretty straightforward. Words can be like a voice, or also seeing images of words. It's, from what I understand, that's a little bit more rare. There's a teacher, Joseph Goldstein, and he talks about thoughts being faint blips or like bubbles, like these wisps of smoke that are barely distinguishable, that just very ephemeral, very subtle, a lot of times kind of popping. But then again, of course, thinking can become very pronounced, very at the forefront of our experience too. A lot just depends on kind of the causes and conditions. So the big question here is, for me anyway, is where did they come from? I think if you ask science where they come from, they don't really know so much. Joseph Goldstein's teacher in India, Munindraji, if I'm pronouncing that right, I remember him saying on a talk that he said they come from outside the mind. And that was a really provocative statement or claim for me, and it really wasn't elaborated on, and I'm not going to elaborate on it. I'll leave it at that for now. But science, and now this is probably a gross misrepresentation, and jump in here to add to this, please. They seem to think it's just kind of like this electrochemical occurrence or processes in the brain, and somehow that translates to particular distinct thoughts. So like if they put you in an MRI and they test on thinking, and then they will map the brain, which parts light up, intensities and things, but so depending on causes and conditions, would that happen the same inside or outside an MRI machine? Would, what led up to that time? If something else would have happened, would the same test have been the same? What if the certain areas of the MRI light up in different people, but then they have different thoughts or thought processes? So there's just so many different causes and conditions that could be gone into. So it seems really complex. And of course, they're trying to kind of map and catalog and build databases and use AI and machine learning and algorithms and trying to quantify and preserve thinking in the mind. There's tons and tons into this now. I'll just leave it at that for now. So before we get into just the thoughts or thinking more specifically, let's do some background on this. So this includes the broader range of mental activity, is what it's often called, and mental formation. So this might include judging, reasoning, concept formation, visualization, problem solving, deliberation, considering an idea, memories, conversations, reflections, imagination, contemplation, and volition as well. So if there's any others that I'm missing, maybe you can come back to that. So there also seems to be this emotional feedback loop with thoughts. So a lot of times thoughts will drive emotions and vice versa. The emotions can fuel certain thoughts. And as soon as we can realize this, we can focus on one. And as we take our foot off the gas pedal of one, the momentum tends to slow down a little bit. So you can try this for yourself the next time the mind's out of control or the emotions are out of control or seemingly out of control. They seem to be amped up in high speed. Can tune into one of those and see how it's being fed. It's like for an emotion, is it being fed and fueled with more thoughts? Or vice versa, is the thinking mind? Take a pause and look at the emotional experience, emotional body, and see what kind of emotions are going on there and if they keep occurring. Okay, so also moods obviously are really important. So moods are kind of like the season of the mind, right? In the kind of the thoughts and emotions are more like the weather. So a mood tends to be like something that sticks around a little bit longer. Emotions tend to be more, I guess, intense a lot of time or short-lived. So when we talk about the mind, there's the the EEG spectrum, EEG frequency of alpha, beta, delta, gamma, and theta waves. I won't go too much into that, mostly because I don't really know, at least from this perspective of established science, how to speak much to that. There's also brainwave entrainment. So I guess that's when they hook you up to an EEG and study your brainwaves and do certain procedures perhaps to affect a certain outcome of certain brainwaves for particular results and do training that way. And of course there's pattern recognition, which humans are fairly decent at, supposedly. Be able to pick out patterns within a bunch of data. There's also pattern completion. You've seen the thing that you can fill in like sentences without the vowels, I think it is, and then you don't need the vowels. You can just fill in the gaps. Or I think there's illusions where pieces are missing. You don't really notice it until you look at the parts that are missing. Of course, there's conditioning, like Pavlov. And then there's proximity. I feel that affects mind too. What we're around, who we're around, how close we are, how intense it is. And then I'll just mention some briefly the fringe and parapolitical here surrounding this, probably starting from the more common to the less common, more fringe. TV programming, it's interesting, it's called programming, right? Like we're programming a mind. What the intent and agenda behind TV programming, things like that are public information now, like Project Mockingbird, about certain intelligence agency assets in the media. Of course, there's subliminal programming. We've seen these things or heard about these things. Some people say it's overblown. Some people say it's not exposed enough. About 24 frames a second, and did this experiment where they put, a classic experiment where they flash Coke and popcorn just like one frame at a time, and it just blipped, and most people can't really perceive it, but then people were supposedly going buying more popcorn and soda. There's something called retinal induction programming. I think that might be a specialized term that's not too wide spread out there. Actually, that's probably kind of ties in with subliminal things as well. Now, there is, something like this might be the seizures. Like if you go to certain websites, sometimes you'll get a warning that if people are susceptible to seizures, please don't watch this because of the different frequency and intensity of light and the duration and amount that it flashes on and off. There was a project that was declassified in the 1970s called MK Ultra, and this involved the CIA doing different experiments with things like electrodes and LSD. And a lot of it has been destroyed, but some of it was released and went through congressional hearings. And you can read about this on Wikipedia. It's pretty mainstream. It's not covered too much though. And there's something called trauma-based mind control, which some people would say that part of those experiments has stuff to do with that. I won't give that more energy than it needs. If you're interested, you can look that up. And some of the most obscure things are something like called remote neural monitoring. And there's a whole book by Dr. Robert Duncan, who's claims to be ex-CIA. And in his book, Project Soul Catcher, let's leave it at that. And of course, in mythology, there's a character in Egyptian mythology called Thoth. And just the word Thoth is similar spelled to thought. And that's pretty widespread information that you can look up on that and how that may or may not be related. Beyond thinking and thoughts and these experiences beyond the frequency spectrum of thinking, when we still and quiet the mind, which just happens fairly naturally with decent meditation instructions and a regular, consistent practice, then the mind will calm down and settle. And then there's these states of consciousness that are possible called jhana. And these are in 8 levels, and they're divided into form and formless states. The first 4 are form, the second are formless. And I'm not going to go too much into these. There's other information on my sites and plenty of information on this, but these are not everyday states of consciousness that are possible to reach with meditators. And they go into gradually more and more subtle, refined states of consciousness, starting with kind of joy on up to the highest level of jhana, immaterial realm that's called the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. I mean, such a rarefied state of consciousness is that. Okay. So what if thinking was kind of like an interface? What if experience, perception, and consciousness can be translated into words and images, kind of what we our everyday life and our experience, if we can translate those into thoughts, and then vice versa, where words and images can influence our experience, perception, and consciousness. Okay, now back to phenomenon of thoughts and thinking. So there's a meditation teacher and psychologist, Tara Brach. I like her material, especially this question I like to throw at people if they're open to it is, what's here now if there's no problem to solve? And some people can't even fathom even considering that even as a hypothetical question, have to kind of emphasize, this is hypothetical, like a thought experiment, because they really hardly can perceive a world or even just a few moments without any kind of problems. So what's here now? There's no problems to solve. There's nothing to fix or change. What's here now? And I'm not going to answer that for you. I'll just go into the other thing that she talks about, this trance of thinking. So we can get lost in thought. That's another common expression, where we're just so absorbed into the thinking mind that we don't really even notice that thinking is even happening until we become mindful that thinking is happening. I've been thinking, especially in meditation, it's really easily noticed. I've been thinking for 5 minutes and I had no idea I was sitting here with my eyes closed. I've just been lost in thought. And so what tends to happen with this is it becomes really tricky. Some people will demonize thoughts. really kind of lay into them and saying, oh, you have to completely stop thinking. And well, that's okay, but I don't think they're the enemy as well. But then on the other extreme, you get people worshiping thoughts and intellect and just keep feeding discursive thought and whatnot. So I think it lies somewhere in between. It's kind of like, it's like maybe thinking is like this analogy where it's like a sledgehammer. And it works great for certain things, but you wouldn't want to bake a cake with a sledgehammer, right? And so overthinking can also act as an alarm clock. I like this kind of teaching and analogy. You're kind of overthinking or just kind of the mind's out of, it seems to be an issue. Then you can use that as, oh, hey, I need to tune in to my heart now. Tune into my emotions and what's going on in the heart. So it's kind of like to wake us up to check in with that. And a lot of times, overthinking can be used as an escape for pain. So all the different strategies for escaping pain, one of them is a distraction into thought to avoid feeling or turning towards pain and seeing how it is. Now, of course, things can get so overwhelming that we can't just always dive into the pain and just live there and be there, because sometimes it can get pretty severe. And I'm not just talking about physical pain, I'm talking about like psychic and mental pain, emotional pain. So the heart tends to amplify things, right? So what are we aligning with? What is the heart aligning with, and what are we using it to amplify? I mean, emotions can actually be very helpful to pour a lot of energy into, amp up something. So it's very important to realize what the heart is in alignment with and what it's amplifying, right? And this notion of using thinking and not thinking using you, being the master of thoughts, not thoughts mastering us. And I'll just wrap this up by saying that it's often said in Theravada Buddhist circles that the Arhat are the fully enlightened ones. They will only think if they want to. There's no kind of stray thoughts, right? Because if we tune in, maybe at the end here briefly, there seems to be some agency to some of our thinking, but some of it just seems to occur out of nowhere without us willing or wanting it to happen for whatever reasons, if we're just observing the thinking mind. Okay, now on to dreams. To define this, a series of thoughts, images, and sensations occurring in a person's mind during sleep. Number 2, a cherished aspiration, ambition, or an ideal. And we're going to focus more on the first definition of what happens during sleep states. Kind of covered that second definition on the last event this was derived from. And I'll be borrowing a little bit from Ajahn Puddadamo's couple talks on dreaming. So there's various states, we pretty much all know this, right? States that we can experience: dreaming, deep sleep, and waking states. The fourth one I just kind of lump a bunch of things together on the fourth one, like meditation. Kind of can touch into all those potentially. Substances, of course, certain drugs and substances can induce certain states that maybe wouldn't fit directly into those other states. There's altered states, maybe like through drumming, chanting, practices. I mean, this wild practices like people being buried, with enough oxygen, so they don't die, obviously. And then a mix of all the above can be as well. Now, the Buddha says that there's these different types of dreams. So it can be visions of the past, either in previous lifespans, if people are willing to consider that. There can be dreams of visions of the future. I'm sure pretty much everybody, if they haven't at least experienced that for themselves, they've heard, dreams come true, right? Okay, messages from other realms, that's kind of a more rarefied one, where if we're open to things in dreams, angels or devas or devas or other beings from other places, And this could go into, who knows, if you're open to considering things like this, even could be like, technological or, remote influencing people talk about. But then the other one is wind in the belly, I think he called it. So it's just kind of like, just different nighttime phenomena that really doesn't need to be put much attention on. There's that thing where if you're like in a cold room at night and maybe you'll have some kind of dream like, I don't know, there's like a lot of ice or ice cubes or something to do with coldness in general. So the big question I have for this are, where do the dreams come from and how do they happen? Like, how does a particular dream happen versus myriad possibilities of that could be happening? It's also said that loving kindness, metta, is great for sweet dreams, having sweet dreams. I do this oftentimes at night and just wishing people well, wishing safety, kindness, happiness, ease, strength, health, well-being, being free, and just can run that through whoever you'd like. And it's just really calming, protective. So when we look at dreams, we have to look at perception and consciousness. So in everyday life, perception is kind of like our recognition, and consciousness is knowing. So if let's take the visual consciousness, shape and color is usually kind of the senses really only see, it's said, shape and color. And then our perception, our recognition of what that particular shape and color is then given a recognition, a perception. So in waking life, that's limited by the acuity of our senses and the faultiness perception. I'm sure we've all seen things where it's been dark out. The classic example is like a rope and it's being mistaken for a snake. I think it depends where you are in the world. Maybe people in the north might mistake like a tree stump for a bear. So when we dream, those limitations fall away a lot. Perception opens up. There doesn't seem to be as much limitation on perception. And with the daily meditation practice too, the perceptual sphere, perceptual field starts to open up, start to see more choices, different ways of looking at things, considering things and viewing things in more of an expanded perception and perspectives. So we talk about deep sleep too. It's in Theravada Buddhism, it's called, they call it Bavanga Consciousness. So this is kind of like it's a deep sleep. There's no dream going on during that portion of sleep. We can also experience this when we're drowsy and then the mind isn't between the mind taking up objects. So whatever the mind focuses on and before it focuses on the next thing, there's this kind of gap where it's not focused on an object. There's even this place in, I think, Buddhist cosmology where these yogis would suppress their consciousness and perception. So kind of they wouldn't want to hear anything, see anything, or be conscious of anything. They would do all these extreme practices to blot all this out. And the Buddha condemned this. And they said the next life they would be born in a heavenly realm where they wouldn't remember any of it. So they would only remember like the very beginning and end of it. And then for I don't know how many eons or however long a time, they would have no memory of it. They might be having the greatest kind of pleasures and time, but no consciousness of it. So the other interesting thing to look at with dreams and consciousness like this is going under, being administered anesthetic. And I've never done this, so I can't really speak to this. But from what I hear, the stories I hear is that it's different than deep sleep because a lot of people will just go, to or 10, 9, and then go, and the next thing they know, they're waking up in the recovery room. With a deep sleep, though, there seems to be a passing of time. I guess some people have experienced passing of time while going under anesthesiology. But from what I understand, most people just kind of, there's the sense of time passing is not similar to deep sleep. So now we can look at lucid dreaming practices. I've done a little bit of this. One of the things, I'll just go through some techniques here. And by lucid dreaming, I mean when you're dreaming, you're aware that you're dreaming, you know you're dreaming. So what you can do is pretty much anything. Some people fly. Some people have relationships with as many people as they, or whoever they want, which I don't know if is the wisest thing or not. I think in the Tibetan tradition, visualization of a 16-petal blue lotus at the throat chakra, and this is supposed to be said to be involved with dreaming. The one that I have done is last and first breath. So paying attention to the last breath before you fall asleep, which I have yet to do. I've tried, haven't been able to do that yet, but keep setting the firm intent and resolve to see if we can become aware of the last breath before drifting off into sleep. And it said you become pretty much lucid. And a lot of people, I know, at least when I become aware that I'm dreaming, a lot of times I'll just wake up because it's, I don't know. I won't speculate on why, but the one thing I have been able to do though is kind of pretty much catch the first breath upon waking. And this will kind of wake us up pretty much instantly if we're aware of that, if it's an in-breath or an out-breath, the first breath upon waking. Another thing is reading in dreams. So I've done this before where I'm in a dream and I'm reading something and I look away and come back to it and then it's completely different. Some people, I think, experience garbled text, but for whatever reason, it just seems confusing when I don't put two and two together and realize it's a dream a lot of times, or when I do, I wake up again. Just kind of like this frustration of going back and forth to the text and it being different each time. The other thing is looking at your hands. That's said to be a common one, to look at your hands while you're dreaming. I don't know about that. Maybe they distort. And a common one is asking yourself throughout the day, sincerely, am I dreaming? Getting into the habit about 5 times a day, just taking a break and say, okay, right now. And so this builds up a habit. So it supposedly will carry over into dream state. So you ask yourself in a dream, am I dreaming? And then, you might realize that, you are dreaming. And again, it might wake you up, or you might turn lucid to a dream. Another one is light switch, flipping a light switch on and off. A lot of this is also in the movie Waking Life, kind of like a rotoscoped, which means animated. It's shot live action and then animated over the top. Walking meditation is the newer one I've heard. I don't know exactly how this works, but see if you can do walking meditation in your dream. I know I was having these dreams for the longest time where I couldn't find a place to meditate in my dreams. That was my goal, and I just kept getting distracted, or something would happen, and I couldn't find So I had this weird kind of anxiety of trying to meditate and not being able to in a dream. Okay, so there's all kinds of devices you can buy too for this if you're interested in. I don't know much about these. I think there's one that will flash some kind of lights when you're getting in certain states that are peak times for dreaming, maybe in certain areas of REM, rapid eye movement, and that can supposedly indicate that you're in a dream without waking you up, if I'm getting that right. Another way is to set an alarm. This is kind of harsh, but you set it for 3:42 in the morning if you're sleeping during that time, and kind of wake up and it jolts you out, and more than likely you'll be able to remember what you were dreaming at least for that short amount of time right before you woke up with the alarm. And journaling, that's classically recommended to, as soon as you wake up and remember a dream, keep a journal right by your bed and write down what it was. And you can do any interpretation later on that, or then too, if you want to go back to sleep or not. It's an interesting question to see if there's awareness in deep sleep. And there's some yogis that claim they can be aware while they're in deep dreamless sleep, just knowing that. And so I don't know about that. I can't really speak to that. And then the other one is, I thought was fascinating, sea mammals can sleep, or actually sleep with one half of the hemisphere of the brain while the other half is awake. That way they can have some kind of, protection if they need to move or do something. So they're not entirely, the brain isn't entirely asleep. So what we're going to do now is a mindfulness of thinking, if you all would feel called and moved to do so. So let's just close our eyes, take another couple deep breaths, and kind of let the words fade away from what I've been speaking on. You can return to your natural breath. I invite you to turn your attention to thoughts and thinking, being mindful of thinking. So if there's no particular thoughts happening, there's no incentive to make those happen right now. Just kind of occupy the space where thoughts arise from. Turn your attention there. So you can notice if you're more of a visual image thinker, if thoughts happen in images more, or in words, either as an inner voice or just language. Or maybe even a visual image of words. So if no thoughts are occurring, just for the sake of this meditation, we'll drop in this. Don't think of a pink elephant. Whatever you do, do not think of a pink elephant. So notice what happened. And if it was a visual, did you notice where that image appeared? For a lot of people, it's kind of like in front of the face, maybe a certain distance away, or maybe even inside the head. Then we can look into like a movie projector where does it seem to be coming from, and then where is it experienced? So sometimes it can be seeming to be projected from the inside of the head and then displayed outside the face, or it could be elsewhere. If it's a language or thinking in words, can notice what part of the body that seems to be coming from. Sometimes it could be the head, it can be the throat. And if we can tune in to, if it's a inner voice, if that voice is our own, if it happens to be maybe from an authority figure or a parent, maybe a teacher, friend, whoever it may be. And let's just spend a few more moments observing thought and thinking. So being the observer, observing the thought, not being the thought or entangled in the thought. Maybe like you're watching TV or you're listening to a podcast. And again, if there's nothing happening, that's okay. You can just be in the space where thoughts arise from, return to perhaps. And now more subtly, tuning still into that space where thoughts arise from. See if we can detect the energy, what it's like energetically, before thoughts arise, and then see if you can catch the arising of a thought. The first moment you're aware of it, and then if it persists for however long, and then it's passing, it's rising and falling. Very subtle phenomenon, thinking. There may even be a possibility to kind of sense when a thought is arising and a choice to have it bubble up into awareness or choose not to have it bubble up in awareness. And it's less of a control than just kind of a sensing and a choice. Maybe wondering if this is suppressing anything. That's a good question. I don't know. Okay, in a few moments, I'll end this brief mindfulness of thinking meditation. Without a bell, we'll end it here. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes, bring yourself back to the room or space. Find yourself in this moment. You can wiggle or move around. Do any movements that feel good. I wish you all very sweet dreams, pleasant dreams, productive dreams, and kind of knowledge of dreams, and whatever you may wish when it comes to this, as well as exploring thinking and how to hold and view and respond to thoughts and thinking mind. Much love and blessings.